The echoing sound of gunshots pierced the evening air as Zara Valentine clutched her swollen belly and ran through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Arizona. The year was 1883, and Zara was 5 months pregnant with no husband, no family, and a group of vengeful outlaws on her trail. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she fled toward the canyon that loomed at the edge of town, her only chance of escape from the men who wanted her dead. The outlaws had murdered her brother 3 weeks earlier after he refused to sell their family's mining claim. Now they were after her, the sole witness to their crime and the only remaining obstacle to taking the land. Zara's breath came in ragged gasps as she reached the rocky entrance to Serpent Canyon, the dangerous maze of stone that few dared to traverse. "You can't run forever, Valentine," a gruff voice shouted from the darkening streets behind her. "That bastard child won't see its first breath." Tears streamed down Zara's dirt-streaked face as she stumbled forward into the shadow of the canyon walls. The evening light was fading fast, and she knew entering the treacherous labyrinth at night was practically a death sentence. But staying in town meant certain death at the hands of Samuel Blackwell's gang. Her foot slipped on loose rock, and Zara gasped as she nearly lost her balance. As she steadied herself against the canyon wall, the sound of approaching horses spurred her deeper into the rocky passage. She had only gone 50 yards when a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Zara's scream died in her throat as she was pulled backward into a narrow crevice between two towering rock faces. "Stay still and quiet if you want to live," a low, masculine voice whispered in her ear. The strong arm around her waist loosened slightly as the thundering hooves of several horses echoed through the canyon entrance. Zara trembled against the stranger's broad chest, too terrified to struggle. "They went in here," a voice called from the mouth of the canyon. "Spread out." "Not at night, you fool," another man responded. "Nobody survives Serpent Canyon after dark without knowing the way. They'll be dead by morning without our help." Through the narrow opening of their hiding place, Zara could see 4 mounted men silhouetted against the fading light, rifles in hand. "We'll camp at the entrance tonight," the leader decided. "If by some miracle they make it through, we'll be waiting on the other side come morning." As the outlaws retreated to set up their camp, the stranger's grip on Zara relaxed. She spun around, prepared to fight, and found herself facing a tall man with a weathered face partially hidden beneath the shadow of a worn Stetson hat. "You're heading to your death going through here at night, madam," he said quietly. "Especially in your condition." "I don't have much choice," Zara whispered back, one hand instinctively moving to protect her unborn child. The stranger's eyes followed her movement, lingering on her rounded belly for a moment before returning to her face. "Name's Dalton James," he said. "Most folks just call me Dal." "Zara Valentine," she replied hesitantly. Dalton nodded toward the deeper recesses of the canyon. "I know a safe path through. Been working as a scout and guide in these parts for 5 years now." He studied her face in the dim light. "Those men after you Blackwell's gang," Zara nodded, surprised. "You know them." "Everyone within 100 miles knows them," Dalton replied grimly. "Question is, what did you do to get on their bad side? My brother refused to sell our mining claim." Zara's voice caught. "They killed him 3 weeks ago. I saw everything." Dalton was quiet for a moment, digesting this information. "And now you're the only thing standing between them and that claim," he concluded. Zara nodded, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "I have family in California, my aunt in Winnetka, if I can make it there." "That's a long journey for a woman alone," Dalton observed, his eyes traveling once more to her pregnant belly. "Especially one in your condition." "I don't have a choice," Zara repeated firmly. Dalton considered her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. I can lead you through the canyon tonight and get you to the next town. After that, we'll figure something out. Why would you help me? Zara asked suspiciously. You don't know me. A shadow passed over Dalton's face. Let's just say I've got no love for Blackwell's gang, he replied cryptically. Now come on. We need to move while we still have a little light. Dalton took her hand and led her deeper into the canyon. The walls rose higher on either side, blocking out the last rays of sunlight. In the growing darkness, Zara found herself completely dependent on the cowboy's guidance. Step exactly where I step, Dalton instructed, keeping his voice low. There are drop-offs and sinkholes throughout this canyon that would swallow a person whole. Zara followed closely, her fingers gripping Dalton's calloused hand as they navigated the treacherous path. The temperature dropped rapidly as night fell, and she shivered in her thin dress. Without a word, Dalton shrugged out of his worn leather coat and draped it around her shoulders. The garment was heavy and smelled of horses, tobacco, and the open desert's surprisingly comforting sense in her current predicament. Thank you, Zara whispered. Dalton merely nodded and continued forward, now using a small lantern he'd produced from his saddlebag to light their way. They walked for hours through the winding canyon passages. Several times, Dalton pulled Zara away from paths that looked deceptively easy but led to dangerous dead ends or unstable ground. Near midnight, Zara's exhaustion became overwhelming. Her steps faltered and she stumbled against a rock wall, gasping in pain. Dalton was at her side immediately. We need to rest, he decided, guiding her to a small alcove in the canyon wall. There's a sheltered spot just ahead where we can stop for a few hours. The sheltered spot turned out to be a small cave, barely visible in the meager light of Dalton's lantern. Inside, the space opened up enough for them to sit comfortably. It's not much, Dalton said apologetically, but it'll keep us hidden and out of the wind. Zara sank gratefully onto the ground, her back against the cool stone wall. Her feet ached and her back throbbed with pain. As if sensing her discomfort, her baby gave a strong kick, making her wince. Are you all right? Dalton asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Just tired, Zara assured him. And the baby's restless tonight. Dalton nodded awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the subject. He busied himself building a small, smokeless fire at the mouth of the cave, just enough to provide some warmth without betraying their location. How far along are you? He finally asked, passing her a canteen of water. 5 months, Zara replied, taking a grateful sip. The baby's due in late summer. Dalton hesitated, then asked the question she had been dreading. And the father? Zara's eyes dropped to her hands. Dead, she said shortly. He was a soldier stationed at Fort Bowie. Apache raid 6 months ago. It wasn't entirely the truth. Thomas had indeed been a soldier, but he'd abandoned her upon learning of the pregnancy, promising to return but never doing so. The news of his death in the raid had come 3 weeks later. Zara had mourned not for the man who had deserted her, but for the future she had briefly allowed herself to imagine. Dalton didn't press for details. Instead, he rummaged in his pack and produced some jerky and hardtack. Not much of a meal, he apologized, but it'll keep your strength up. They ate in silence, the small fire casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. When they finished, Dalton insisted Zara take his bedroll while he kept watch at the cave entrance. Get some sleep, he urged. We'll move at first light. If we keep a good pace, we should clear the canyon by midday tomorrow. Despite her exhaustion, Zara found sleep elusive. Her mind raced with thoughts of the outlaws, her brother's murder, and the uncertain future that awaited her and her child. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Dalton's silhouette against the dying fire. There was something comforting about his quiet, solid presence, a steadiness she hadn't felt since her brother's death. "Were you always a canyon guide?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Dalton turned, surprised to find her still awake. "No," he admitted. "I was a cavalry scout for the Army for almost 10 years. Before that, I worked cattle drives up from Texas." "What brought you here?" Dalton was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. "I lost someone," he finally said, his voice low. "Needed to get away from people for a while. The canyon doesn't ask questions or offer sympathy. It just is." The raw pain in his voice silenced any further questions Zara might have had. She closed her eyes, allowing the rhythmic sound of Dalton's breathing to lull her into an uneasy sleep. Dawn came too soon. Zara awoke to Dalton's gentle shake of her shoulder and the pale light of early morning filtering into the cave. "We need to move," he said urgently. "I heard voices echoing through the canyon. They might have sent men in from both ends." They hurriedly packed up their meager camp, and Dalton extinguished all traces of their fire. Within minutes, they were moving again, deeper into the maze of stone passages. The morning air was crisp, but Zara could feel the promise of heat as the sun rose higher. She followed Dalton closely, noting how he occasionally stopped to study marks on the canyon walls, subtle scratches that seemed to guide his path. "My own trail markers," he explained when he caught her watching. "Took me 3 months of exploring to map a safe route through this place. Not many know it exists." "Why share it with me then?" Zara asked. Dalton's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Let's just say I've never been fond of bullies. Blackwell's gang has terrorized this territory long enough." As they rounded a bend in the canyon, the passage suddenly widened into a breathtaking vista. A natural bridge of stone arched across the chasm, connecting their path to the other side. Beneath it, a dizzying drop of several hundred feet ended in a dry riverbed. "The Bridge of Souls," Dalton said quietly. "Local Apache believe it's a crossing place between this world and the spirit world." Zara stared at the narrow stone arch with trepidation. "We have to cross that." Dalton nodded. "It's the only way through unless we backtrack 5 miles. The bridge is solid, I've crossed it dozens of times. Just don't look down." He offered his hand and Zara took it, drawing strength from his steady grip. They had taken only a few steps onto the bridge when a shout echoed through the canyon behind them. "There they are." Dalton spun around, pushing Zara behind him. 2 of Blackwell's men had appeared at the entrance to the passage they had just left. One was raising a rifle to his shoulder. "Run," Dalton ordered, drawing his revolver. "Get across the bridge, I'll cover you." "Dalton, go," he barked, firing a shot that sent the outlaws diving for cover, hard in her throat. Zara ran across the narrow stone bridge, trying desperately not to think about the drop on either side. Behind her, she could hear the exchange of gunfire, Dalton's measured shots against the outlaws' more frantic barrage. She reached the other side just as Dalton began his own crossing, walking backward as he continued to fire at their pursuers. One of the outlaws crumpled to the ground with a cry of pain. Dalton was halfway across when the surviving outlaw emerged from cover and took careful aim. Zara screamed a warning, but it came too late. The rifle cracked, and Dalton staggered as the bullet found its mark in his left shoulder. For a terrifying moment, he swayed on the narrow bridge. Then, gritting his teeth, he straightened and fired back, his shot catching the outlaw square in the chest. The man fell forward, his body tumbling into the chasm below. Dalton made it across the bridge, his face pale beneath his tan, blood soaking through his shirt. "We need to keep moving," he gasped, holstering his revolver. "There'll be more coming." "You're hurt," Zara protested, reaching for his wounded shoulder. "It'll keep," Dalton replied grimly. This canyon's got plenty more surprises for anyone following us, but we need to put distance between us and them." Despite his injury, Dalton set a grueling pace through the winding passages of the canyon. By midday, as he had predicted, they could see the end of the stone labyrinth ahead, an opening that revealed the vast desert beyond. But as they approached the exit, Dalton suddenly pulled Zara into the shadow of an overhanging rock. "Riders," he whispered, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance. "At least 3 coming this way." "Blackwell's men, likely," Dalton confirmed. "They're cutting us off." Zara's heart sank. They had come so far only to be trapped at the canyon's exit. "What do we do now?" Dalton studied the terrain, his eyes narrowed against the bright sunlight. "There's a side passage about 100 yards back," he said finally. "Leads to a box canyon with a spring. Not many know about it. We can hole up there until dark, then try to slip past them." The side passage was so narrow they had to turn sideways to navigate it. It opened into a small, enclosed canyon with steep walls on 3 sides. True to Dalton's word, a small spring bubbled from the rock at the far end, surrounded by a patch of green growth, a miracle of life in the otherwise barren landscape. "We'll be safe here for now," Dalton said, his voice tight with pain. He slumped against a boulder, his face alarmingly pale. Zara knelt beside him, gently peeling away his blood-soaked shirt to examine the wound. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, missing any major vessels but leaving a nasty hole that was still bleeding steadily. "I need to clean and bind this," she said firmly. Dalton didn't argue, which worried her more than the wound itself. She tore strips from her petticoat and used water from the spring to clean away the blood and dirt. Dalton hissed in pain but remained otherwise silent as she worked. "You've done this before," he observed as she expertly bound the wound with the makeshift bandages. "My father was a doctor in St. Louis before we moved west," Zara explained. "He taught me the basics of wound care." She didn't add that she had put those skills to frequent use during her brief marriage to Thomas, patching up injuries from drunken brawls that he seemed to find with alarming regularity. When she had finished, Dalton's color looked slightly better, though his forehead was beaded with sweat. "Thank you," he said quietly. Zara nodded, settling beside him against the boulder. "Why are you really helping me, Dalton?" she asked after a moment of silence. "And don't tell me it's just because you dislike Blackwell's gang." Dalton's blue eyes met hers, then dropped to her pregnant belly. "I had a sister once," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Martha. She found herself in a situation similar to yours, expecting a child, alone after her husband died in a mining accident. She tried to make it on her own, but—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "She died in childbirth. The baby, too. I was off scouting for the cavalry. Didn't even know she needed help until it was too late." Zara's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Been 5 years now," Dalton continued. "When I saw you running into that canyon pregnant and alone with those men after you." He shook his head. Couldn't stand by and watch history repeat itself. The simple honesty of his admission touched something deep within Zara. For the first time since her brother's murder, she felt a flicker of hope, not just for survival, but for something more. They rested through the afternoon, taking turns keeping watch at the entrance to their hidden sanctuary. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Dalton insisted on checking the canyon exit again. "Stay here," he told Zara. "I'll be back within the hour." Despite her protests, he slipped away, moving silently through the narrow passage. Alone in the small canyon, Zara's mind raced with possibilities and fears. What if Dalton didn't return? What if Blackwell's men found their hiding place? What future awaited her and her child if they somehow survived this ordeal? The baby kicked vigorously, as if responding to her anxiety. Zara placed a hand on her belly, whispering soothing words to the child within. "We'll be all right," she promised, hoping it wasn't a lie. "This man, Dalton, he's helping us. I think we can trust him." As the shadows lengthened across the canyon floor, Zara grew increasingly worried about Dalton's absence. It had been well over an hour since he'd left. She was debating whether to venture out to look for him when she heard footsteps approaching through the narrow passage. She shrank back against the canyon wall, reaching for Dalton's spare revolver that he had left with her. The footsteps came closer, and then Dalton himself appeared, his expression grim. "We have a problem," he announced without preamble. "Blackwell himself has arrived with more men. They've set up camp at the canyon exit and sent riders to check every side passage." Zara's blood ran cold. "They'll find us." "Not if we leave now," Dalton countered. "There's another way out of this box canyon, a narrow trail that leads up and over the ridge to the north. It's treacherous, and I wouldn't normally recommend it, especially for someone in your condition. But right now, it's our only option." "How did you know about it?" Zara asked, gathering her few belongings. "Found it last year while tracking a mountain lion that had been killing livestock," Dalton explained. "The local Apache have used it for centuries, but most white folks don't know it exists." The trail was even more harrowing than Dalton had described, a barely visible path that wound up the sheer canyon wall, sometimes no wider than a foot. In places, hand and footholds had been carved into the rock by unknown hands long ago. Dalton led the way, his wounded shoulder clearly causing him pain as he hauled himself up the more difficult sections. Despite his injury, he repeatedly reached back to offer Zara assistance, his strong hand steady and reassuring. The climb seemed endless. Zara's arms trembled with fatigue and her back ached fiercely. Several times, loose rocks dislodged beneath her feet, sending small avalanches of stone clattering down the canyon wall. Each time they froze, listening for any indication that the sound had alerted Blackwell's men. By the time they reached the top of the ridge, night had fully fallen. The desert stretched before them in all directions, bathed in silvery moonlight. In the distance, the faint glow of campfires marked the position of Blackwell's men at the canyon exit. "We'll head northeast," Dalton decided, studying the terrain. "There's a small settlement about 15 miles from here, Cooper's Creek. It's not much more than a trading post and a few cabins, but they know me there. We can get fresh supplies and horses." 15 miles, Zara repeated, dismayed. Her feet were already blistered and swollen. Dalton's expression softened as he took in her exhaustion. "We'll take it slow," he promised. "Should reach it by tomorrow afternoon if we walk through the night and rest during the hottest part of the day." They set out across the moonlit desert, Dalton setting a pace that Zara could maintain despite her fatigue and pregnancy. He kept one hand at her elbow, steadying her when she stumbled on the uneven ground. As they walked, Dalton told her stories of his years as a cavalry scout, encounters with Apache warriors, tracking expeditions that lasted weeks, and the camaraderie of frontier life. His deep voice washed over Zara, distracting her from the pain in her feet and the ache in her back. In return, she shared memories of her childhood in St. Louis, her father's medical practice, and her family's journey west after the war. She spoke of her brother's dreams for their mining claim and the small cabin he had built for them near Silver Creek. She did not speak of Thomas, her soldier husband, or the brief, tumultuous marriage that had left her with child but little else. Something held her back, perhaps the fear of judgment, or the pain that still lingered when she thought of his betrayal and subsequent death. Dawn found them still walking, though Zara's pace had slowed considerably. The desert heat rose quickly as the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky. By mid-morning, the temperature was becoming unbearable. There, Dalton pointed to a cluster of large boulders in the distance. We can rest there through the worst of the heat. Should give us some shade at least. The boulders formed a natural shelter, creating a shaded alcove that offered blessed relief from the sun's relentless glare. Dalton insisted Zara take the spot with the most shade while he kept watch from a position where he could see the desert in all directions. "Try to sleep," he advised. "We'll move again in the late afternoon." Despite her exhaustion, Zara found it difficult to relax. Every sound made her tense, a lizard skittering across the sand, the distant cry of a hawk, the whisper of wind through the scrub brush. She kept imagining Blackwell's men appearing on the horizon, rifles raised. "They won't find us here," Dalton assured her, as if reading her thoughts. "The ridge we crossed leads into Apache territory. Blackwell's men won't follow us this far." "And what about the Apache?" Zara asked anxiously. A faint smile crossed Dalton's weathered face. "I spent 3 years living among them when I was scouting for the army. Made some friends. They know me, call me man who walks between worlds." He shrugged his good shoulder. "Fancy way of saying I understand both sides." Zara studied him with new interest. "You speak their language," Dalton nodded. "Enough to get by. Saved my life more than once." "Is that how you knew about the hidden trails through the canyon?" "Partly," Dalton admitted. "The rest I learned through trial and error. Nearly died a few times before I mapped it all out." The casual way he mentioned his near-death experiences made Zara wonder what kind of life Dalton James had led before their paths crossed. There was a depth to him that suggested experiences beyond those of an ordinary frontier scout, a quiet intensity in his blue eyes that spoke of both pain and resilience. Against all odds, Zara eventually dozed off in the shelter of the boulders. She woke to Dalton's gentle touch on her shoulder and the sun hanging low in the western sky. "Time to move," he said softly. "Cooper's Creek is about 7 miles northeast from here. We should reach it by nightfall." The evening walk was easier than their morning journey had been. The cooling air revived Zara's spirits, and knowing they were approaching civilization gave her renewed energy. Dalton seemed stronger too, though she noticed he favored his wounded shoulder, wincing occasionally when he moved too quickly. The sun had just disappeared behind the distant mountains when the first signs of Cooper's Creek came into view, a wooden water tower silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Almost there," Dalton encouraged, his hand steady at her elbow. The settlement was indeed small, just a cluster of weathered buildings surrounding a central trading post. As they approached, a dog began barking, alerting the inhabitants to their presence. A man stepped onto the porch of the trading post, rifle in hand. "Who's out there?" He called into the gathering darkness. "Dalton James," Dalton replied, stepping into the pool of lantern light that spilled from the post's windows. "And a friend in need of shelter." The man lowered his rifle, his wary expression changing to one of welcome. "Dal, been months since we've seen you." His gaze shifted to Zara, taking in her dusty, travel-worn appearance and her pregnant condition. "Madam," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Cooper," Dalton greeted him. "We've had a rough journey. Blackwell's gang is after Mrs. Valentine here. We came through Serpent Canyon and over the North Ridge." Cooper's bushy eyebrows shot up. "That's a hard road for anyone, let alone a lady in her condition." He stepped back, holding the door open. Come in, come in. Emma will fix you both something hot to eat." The interior of the trading post was warm and smelled of coffee, tobacco, and leather goods. A plump, motherly woman, presumably Emma, emerged from a back room, her face lighting up at the sight of Dalton. Dalton James, as I live and breathe," she exclaimed, then gasped when she noticed his blood-stained shirt. "You're hurt." "It's nothing, Emma," Dalton assured her. "Just a flesh wound, already been cleaned and bandaged." Emma's attention shifted to Zara, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of Zara's exhausted state. "Oh, you poor dear," she clucked sympathetically. "You look ready to drop. Come sit by the fire while I heat up some stew." Within minutes, Zara found herself seated in a comfortable chair near the hearth, a bowl of hot venison stew in her hands and a cup of strong, sweet coffee on the table beside her. Dalton sat across from her, speaking in low tones with Cooper about Blackwell's gang and their pursuit. "Won't cross into Apache territory," Cooper was saying, "but they'll be watching the trails. Word is Blackwell's offering $500 for information on your whereabouts." Dalton's expression darkened. Mrs. Valentine witnessed them murdering her brother over a mining claim. "They won't stop coming after her." Cooper stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Stage comes through tomorrow, heading for Tucson. From there, you could catch the train west." "Too public," Dalton shook his head. "Blackwell's got men watching all the usual routes." "What about the old military road?" Emma suggested, joining the conversation. "It's hardly used since the new fort was built, but it's still passable. Leads all the way to the Colorado River. From there, you could follow the river into California." Dalton considered this, his blue eyes thoughtful. "That might work. We'd need horses, supplies." "Consider it done," Cooper said firmly. "After what you did for my boy last winter, tracking him when he got lost in that blizzard, I owe you more than I can ever repay." Zara listened to this exchange with mixed emotions. The idea of continuing their dangerous journey westward with Dalton both relieved and troubled her. She had come to rely on his steady presence, his knowledge of the land, and his unwavering protection. Yet she couldn't ask him to risk his life further for her sake, not when he'd already been wounded defending her. As if sensing her thoughts, Dalton's gaze shifted to hers. "Get some rest," he said gently. "We've got a lot to decide tomorrow." Emma showed Zara to a small but clean bedroom at the back of the trading post. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's private and the bed's comfortable." "It's perfect," Zara assured her, nearly overwhelmed by the luxury of a real bed after their harrowing journey. Emma hesitated at the door, her kind face troubled. "Dalton's a good man," she said finally. "Best I've known in these parts. Whatever trouble you're in, he'll see you through it." With that cryptic assurance, she left Zara alone. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Zara for some time. Her mind whirled with the events of the past 2 days, the danger that still pursued them, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Most of all, she thought of Dalton James, the quiet, capable man who had risked everything to help a stranger. When sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of the canyon, of running through endless stone passages with Blackwell's men close behind. In the dream, Dalton appeared before her, offering his hand, leading her toward the light. Zara awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices in the trading post's main room. Sunlight streamed through the small window of her bedroom, suggesting it was well into the morning. She dressed quickly in clean clothes. Emma had left for her a simple calico dress that had been let out to accommodate her pregnancy. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Dalton, Cooper, and Emma gathered around a map spread out on the counter. Dalton looked up as she entered, his face brightening. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Zara admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Emma offered her. Cooper tapped the map with a weathered finger. "We've been planning your route west. The old military road is your best bet. It's little more than a trail in places, but it'll take you through country that Blackwell's men won't know well." Dalton traced a line across the map. "It's about 200 miles to the Colorado River. From there, we can follow the river into California. Another 150 miles would bring us to settlements where we could catch a stage to Winnetka." Zara questioned, her heart skipping a beat. "Dalton, you've already done more than I could ever repay. I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Dalton interrupted. "I'm offering." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Unless you'd prefer to continue alone." The thought of facing the journey without him was terrifying. "No," Zara admitted quietly, "but your shoulder is healing fine," Dalton assured her. "Emma changed the bandage this morning. Clean exit wound, no sign of infection." "I've packed supplies for you both," Emma announced, gesturing to several bundles on the counter. "Food, medical supplies, extra ammunition. Cooper's providing 2 good horses and a pack mule." Zara was overwhelmed by their generosity. "How can I possibly thank you?" Emma patted her hand. "Just get safely to California, dear. That's thanks enough." Cooper cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know," he said, his expression grave. "Ryder came through early this morning heading east. Says Blackwell's put the word out that you're wanted for murder, Mrs. Valentine. Claims you shot your brother in a dispute over the mining claim, then fled." Zara gasped, one hand flying to her throat. "That's a lie. He murdered my brother in cold blood." "We know that," Dalton said calmly, "but it means the law might be looking for you now, too. All the more reason to stay off the main roads and settlements." The implications were staggering. Even if she escaped Blackwell's gang, she might now be facing arrest and prosecution for a crime she didn't commit. Her hand moved protectively to her belly. What would happen to her child if she were imprisoned or worse, hanged? Dalton seemed to read the fear in her eyes. "One problem at a time," he said firmly. "First, we get you safely to California. Then we can work on clearing your name." They left Cooper's Creek shortly after noon, heading northwest on the overgrown track that had once served as a military supply route. Dalton rode a sturdy buckskin gelding, while Zara was mounted on a gentle bay mare that Cooper assured them was well suited for a pregnant woman. A pack mule followed behind, laden with their supplies. The desert landscape stretched endlessly before them, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings or clusters of saguaro cacti. Dalton set a steady pace, mindful of Zara's condition and the need to conserve their horses' strength for the long journey ahead. As they rode, Dalton pointed out various landmarks and shared stories of his time scouting in this territory. He had a gift for storytelling, painting vivid pictures of Apache raids, cavalry patrols, and the harsh beauty of the desert wilderness. "How did you become a scout?" Zara asked during a brief rest to water the horses at a small seep spring. Dalton leaned against a boulder, hat pushed back on his head. "Grew up in Texas, working cattle ranches, had a knack for tracking and finding my way in rough country. When the Army came recruiting after the war, seemed like a good opportunity." "And after the Army," a shadow crossed Dalton's face. "After my sister died, I couldn't stomach taking orders anymore, wanted to be on my own, make my own decisions." He shrugged. "Canyon guiding pays decent money when there's work. Rest of the time I hunt, trap, do odd jobs for folks like Cooper." There was more to the story. Zara could sense it in the careful way he chose his words, in the pain that flickered briefly in his eyes before he masked it. But she didn't press. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred to keep buried. They made camp that evening in the shelter of a dry wash, where the high banks provided protection from both the wind and prying eyes. Dalton built a small fire, using dry wood that produced minimal smoke. As they ate a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee, the vast desert sky above them bloomed with stars more than Zara had ever seen, even in the remote mining country near Silver Creek. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing upward. Dalton followed her gaze. "Apache believe the stars are the campfires of spirits who have gone before us. They watch over the living, guiding them through the darkness." "You believe that?" He considered the question seriously. "I believe there's more to this world than what we can see and touch," he said finally. "Whether it's spirits, angels, or just the memories we carry, those we've lost are still with us somehow." The simple eloquence of his words touched Zara deeply. She thought of her brother, her parents, and even Thomas, all gone now, but still present in the person she had become. "My brother always said we'd strike it rich with that mining claim," she said softly. "He worked so hard, believed so completely. Even when winter came and we were down to our last supplies, he never lost faith." Tears welled in her eyes. He was going to be so proud to be an uncle. Dalton's hand found hers in the firelight, his calloused fingers warm and steady. "He would have been," he agreed quietly. They sat in companionable silence for a time, hands joined, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. In that moment, despite the danger that pursued them and the uncertain future ahead, Zara felt a profound sense of peace. The feeling was shattered at dawn when Dalton shook her awake, his expression grim. "Riders," he whispered, "coming from the east. Get up slowly and gather only what you absolutely need." Heart pounding, Zara rolled up her bedroll while Dalton quickly obliterated all signs of their camp. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving again, riding hard for a distant ridgeline where Dalton said they could lose any pursuit. "Did you see who it was?" Zara asked when they finally slowed their pace, the horses blowing hard from the exertion. "Not clearly," Dalton admitted. "4 riders moving fast. Could be Blackwell's men, could be Apache. Either way, best not to wait and find out." They pushed on through the morning, following a route that took them through increasingly rough terrain, rocky arroyos, steep hillsides, and narrow passes that would be difficult for anyone unfamiliar with the land to navigate. By midday, there was no sign of pursuit, but Dalton remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail and studying the horizon with narrowed eyes. His tension was contagious, and Zara found herself startling at every distant sound. The landscape was changing as they moved west, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills, and eventually the foothills of a low mountain range. Scrubby pine and juniper began to appear among the cacti and brush, offering welcome shade from the afternoon sun. The mountains ahead marked the border between Arizona and California, Dalton explained as they paused to rest the horses. "Once we cross them, we'll follow the Colorado River south. 2, maybe 3 more days to reach settlements where Blackwell's influence won't reach." Zara nodded, trying to hide her exhaustion. The constant riding was taking its toll on her pregnant body. Her back ached fiercely, and she had begun to experience occasional sharp pains that worried her. Dalton noticed her discomfort despite her efforts to conceal it. "We'll make camp early tonight," he decided. "There's a good spot about 5 miles ahead, sheltered valley with a year-round spring. You need proper rest." "I can keep going," Zara protested weakly. Dalton's gaze was knowing. "The baby needs you strong," he said simply. Pushing too hard now could bring trouble later. The valley Dalton had mentioned proved to be a small paradise in the harsh landscape, a green oasis nestled between rocky slopes. A clear spring bubbled from the base of a cliff, creating a small pool before continuing as a stream through the valley floor. Cottonwood and willow trees provided ample shade, and lush grass offered grazing for the tired horses. "This is beautiful," Zara breathed as Dalton helped her dismount. Her legs trembled with fatigue as they took her weight. "Used to be an Apache camping ground," Dalton explained, supporting her with a strong arm around her waist. Sacred place for them. They call it Valley of the Mother Waters. He led her to a flat area beneath a large cottonwood tree and spread his bedroll for her to sit on. Rest, he instructed. I'll take care of the horses and get a fire going. Too exhausted to argue, Zara sank gratefully onto the bedroll. She watched through half-closed eyes as Dalton efficiently unpacked the horses, set up their small camp, and gathered wood for a fire. There was a grace to his movements, a quiet competence that spoke of years living in the wilderness. When the fire was crackling cheerfully and coffee was brewing in a battered pot, Dalton finally sat down beside her. "How are you feeling, really?" he asked, his blue eyes serious. Zara considered lying, then thought better of it. "Tired," she admitted. "Sore. And I've been having some pains, not labor, I don't think, but concerning." Dalton frowned. "What kind of pains?" "Sharp twinges here," she indicated her lower abdomen. "They come and go. My mother used to call them practice pains when she was expecting my younger siblings." "Braxton Hicks contractions," Dalton nodded. "My sister had them too. Not dangerous by themselves, but you need to rest and drink plenty of water." Zara looked at him with surprise. "How do you know about women's matters?" A faint smile touched Dalton's lips. "Grew up with 3 sisters, and I was with Martha through most of her pregnancy." His expression sobered. "Learned a lot about childbirth too, though not enough to save her when things went wrong." The grief in his voice was palpable. Impulsively, Zara reached out and took his hand. "It wasn't your fault, Dalton." He squeezed her fingers gently but didn't respond directly. Instead, he rose and poured her a cup of coffee, adding a generous spoonful of sugar from their supplies. "Drink this," he said, handing her the cup. "Then try to sleep for a while. We're safe here for the night." Zara sipped the hot, sweet coffee gratefully. "What about the riders you saw this morning? If they were following us, they lost our trail when we entered the hills," Dalton assured her. "I chose a route that's difficult to track, mostly rock and hard ground." As the evening deepened into night, Zara found herself reluctant to sleep despite her exhaustion. The peaceful valley, with its gurgling spring and whispering leaves, created an atmosphere of tranquility that seemed too precious to waste in slumber. Dalton sat across the fire from her, cleaning his revolver with practiced movements. In the flickering light, his face was a study in contrast, strong jawline softened by the gentle curve of his lips, weathered skin and crinkles around his eyes that spoke of both hardship and laughter. "Tell me about your family," Zara requested, breaking the comfortable silence. "You mentioned sisters." Dalton glanced up, a look of surprise crossing his face before he smiled slightly. "3 of them, all older than me. They basically raised me after our mother died when I was 6. And your father, cattle rancher in the Texas Panhandle, tough man, fair but stern, taught me to ride, shoot, and track almost before I could walk." Dalton reassembled his revolver with swift, sure movements. "He died during the war, not fighting, but defending our ranch from raiders." "I'm sorry," Zara said softly. Dalton shrugged, but there was no indifference in the gesture. "It was a long time ago. My sisters are all married now, scattered across Texas and New Mexico. I visit when I can, which isn't often. They must worry about you." A genuine smile lightened his features. "They've given up worrying. Sarah, that's my oldest sister, says I've got more lives than a cat." He holstered his revolver and leaned back against his saddle. "What about you? Any family besides your brother and the aunt in California?" Zara shook her head. "Just my Aunt Louise in Winnetka now. She's my mother's sister, never married, runs a small boarding house near the train station." She traced patterns in the dirt beside her. "She doesn't know about the baby, or that my brother is dead. My last letter to her was months ago." "She'll be glad to see you," Dalton said with quiet certainty. "Family is family." Even when the family member arrives unmarried and pregnant, Zara couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Dalton studied her across the fire. Your husband, the soldier you mentioned, what really happened? The question caught Zara off guard. For a moment, she considered maintaining the fiction she had created, but something in Dalton's steady gaze made her want to tell the truth. Thomas wasn't killed by Apache, she admitted. He left. When I told him I was expecting, he promised to return after his next patrol, said he needed time to think. She swallowed hard. 2 weeks later, word came that he'd deserted, crossed into Mexico. 3 weeks after that, they found his body killed in a cantina brawl over a card game. Dalton was silent for a long moment. I'm sorry, he finally said. Don't be, Zara replied, surprised to find she meant it. He wasn't a good man in the end. My brother never liked him, said Thomas had shifty eyes and couldn't be trusted. She sighed. I should have listened. We all make choices we regret, Dalton said quietly. What matters is what you do after. His words resonated with Zara. She had spent months berating herself for her poor judgment, for believing Thomas's lies, for finding herself alone and pregnant in a harsh frontier world. But now, facing an uncertain future with a strange courage she hadn't known she possessed, she realized she had moved beyond regret to determination. I want my child to have a good life, she said firmly. A safe home, enough to eat, people who love them. I don't know how I'll manage it, but I will. Dalton nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. I believe you will, he said simply. They fell silent again, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned low. Eventually, Zara's exhaustion overcame her, and she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to birdsong and the smell of cooking. Opening her eyes, she found Dalton crouched by a small fire, frying something in a battered pan. The morning light was soft and golden, filtering through the cottonwood leaves above. Morning, Dalton greeted her with a smile. Caught some fish in the stream. Not much, but better than jerky for breakfast. Zara sat up, surprised to find she felt genuinely rested for the first time in days. The sharp pains had subsided, though her back still ached dully. How long did I sleep? She asked, accepting the tin plate of flaky white fish that Dalton handed her. About 12 hours, he replied. You needed it. The fish was delicious, simply seasoned with salt but fresh and tender. Zara ate with unexpected appetite, realizing how tired she had grown of their trail rations. We should reach the Colorado River by nightfall if we keep a steady pace, Dalton said as they cleaned up after breakfast. There's an abandoned ferry crossing where we can camp. From there, it's about 100 miles following the river until we reach Fort Mohave. And then, Zara asked, helping him pack their meager camp. Then we follow the old emigrant road west into California, Dalton explained. It's well-traveled enough that Blackwell's men won't try anything, but not so busy that we'll attract much notice. The day's ride was less strenuous than previous days had been. The terrain, while still rugged, offered more shade and water, and the horses seemed to sense they were heading toward civilization. Dalton kept them moving at a steady pace, frequently checking on Zara's comfort and insisting they stop to rest whenever she showed signs of fatigue. By late afternoon, they had climbed a final ridge and could see the Colorado River in the distance, a sinuous band of blue cutting through the desert landscape. There it is, Dalton said, pointing. California's on the other side. Zara felt a surge of hope at the sight. They had come so far already, escaping Blackwell's immediate grasp. Perhaps they really would make it to Winnetka after all. The abandoned ferry crossing proved to be little more than a cleared area on the riverbank and the remains of a crude dock, but it offered a flat, sheltered spot for their camp. Dalton busied himself setting up while Zara walked to the river's edge, drawn by the first large body of water she had seen in months. The Colorado flowed wide and deep here, its surface reflecting the gold and crimson of the setting sun. Zara knelt carefully and dipped her hands into the cool water, washing away the dust of their journey. After a moment's hesitation, she removed her boots and stockings and waded ankle-deep into the river, sighing with pleasure as the water soothed her swollen feet. "Careful," Dalton called from the camp. "Current's stronger than it looks." "I won't go any deeper," Zara promised, understanding his concern. She stood quietly in the shallows, watching the play of light on the water and feeling, for the first time in weeks, a sense of genuine peace. When she returned to camp, she found Dalton had prepared a more substantial meal than usual: rice with dried meat and wild onions he had gathered along the trail. As they ate, watching the last light fade from the sky, Zara realized how comfortable she had become in Dalton's company. The initial wariness she had felt toward this stranger had been replaced by trust, respect, and something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After you've seen me safely to Winnetka?" Dalton looked surprised by the question. "Haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "Return to Arizona, I suppose. It's been my home for 5 years now." Even with Blackwell still there, a hardness entered Dalton's blue eyes. "Blackwell's days are numbered. Too many people want him gone: settlers, ranchers, even some of the lawmen he hasn't bought off. Sooner or later someone will take him down." "You?" Zara asked quietly. Dalton was silent for a long moment. "Maybe," he finally acknowledged. "He's hurt too many innocent people." "Your brother was just the latest." Zara studied his profile in the firelight: the straight nose, firm jaw, and eyes that had seen too much violence but hadn't lost their humanity. In that moment, she realized with startling clarity that she didn't want to say goodbye to Dalton James when they reached California. The thought was both frightening and exhilarating. After Thomas's betrayal, she had sworn never to depend on a man again, never to give another the power to hurt her as he had done. Yet here she was, barely a week after meeting Dalton, contemplating a future that included him. "You could come to Winnetka," she suggested, her heart pounding. "California's growing fast. They need men who know the land, who can guide settlers." Dalton looked at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Is that what you want, Zara?" he asked, his voice low. The direct question caught her off guard. She began, then faltered, uncertain how to express the jumble of emotions she was feeling. Before she could find the words, Dalton's head snapped up, his attention caught by something beyond the circle of firelight. In one fluid motion, he was on his feet, revolver drawn. "What is it?" Zara whispered, fear flooding back. "Someone's watching us," Dalton replied, his voice barely audible. "Stay here. Don't move." He melted into the darkness beyond the fire, moving with the silent grace of a predator. Zara sat frozen, straining her ears for any sound of confrontation. The night seemed suddenly full of threatening noises: the rustle of leaves, the splash of water against the riverbank, the distant cry of a night bird. When Dalton reappeared several minutes later, his expression was grim. "Apache scouts," he said quietly, holstering his revolver. "2 of them. They didn't threaten, just watched, then disappeared when they knew I'd spotted them." "What does it mean?" Zara asked, her throat dry with fear. "Could be nothing," Dalton replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Could be they're keeping tabs on who's passing through their territory. Or what?" Dalton hesitated. "Blackwell's been known to hire Apache renegades to do his dirty work when his own men can't get the job done." He shook his head. "Either way, we need to move, now, before full dark." "Now," Zara repeated, dismayed. "But the horses, We'll have to manage, Dalton cut in, already moving to break camp. I don't like this, Zara. Something feels wrong. Within minutes, they had packed their belongings and saddled the horses. Dalton doused the fire, plunging their camp into darkness broken only by the faint light of the rising moon. We'll cross here, he decided, studying the river. The water's lower than usual. Horses can wade across if we're careful. Once we're on the California side, we'll head downstream about 5 miles, then make camp again. That should throw off anyone following. The river crossing was terrifying. The water, which had seemed so peaceful earlier, now rose to the horses' bellies, tugging at them with surprising force. Dalton led the way, one hand on his horse's bridle, the other holding the lead rope of Zara's mare. The pack mule followed behind, snorting nervously as the current swirled around its legs. Halfway across, Zara's mare stumbled on a submerged rock, nearly unseating her. Dalton's quick reaction, pulling hard on the lead rope, kept both Zara and the horse upright, but the moment of panic left her gasping and clinging to the saddle horn. "Almost there," Dalton encouraged, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his shoulders. "Just a few more yards." When they finally reached the western bank, Zara was trembling with exhaustion and delayed fear. Dalton helped her dismount, his strong hands gentle as he lifted her from the saddle. "You did well," he said softly, his face close to hers in the moonlight. "We're in California now." The realization gave Zara a renewed surge of hope. "One step closer to safety," she murmured. Dalton nodded, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. "Let's keep moving. We need distance between us and those scouts." They rode south along the riverbank, the moon providing just enough light to navigate. Zara fought to stay alert, but the events of the day and the emotional upheaval of her earlier conversation with Dalton had left her drained. She found herself drifting, jerking awake periodically with the terrifying sensation of falling. After what seemed like hours, Dalton finally called a halt in a small clearing surrounded by mesquite trees. "We'll rest here until dawn," he decided. "I don't think we were followed across the river." Too exhausted to help with the horses, Zara sank onto her bedroll as soon as Dalton spread it out. She was asleep within minutes, vaguely aware of Dalton settling nearby, his revolver close at hand. The sound of birdsong woke her again, along with the gentle touch of morning sunlight on her face. She opened her eyes to find Dalton already up, checking their supplies and readying the horses for another day's journey. "Any sign of trouble?" she asked, sitting up stiffly. Dalton shook his head. "All quiet. We should reach Fort Mojave in 3 days if we keep a steady pace." He hesitated, then added, "About last night, what we were discussing before the scouts appeared." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. In the light of day, her suggestion that Dalton come to Winnetka seemed presumptuous, even desperate. "It was just a thought," she said quickly. "I know you have your own life in Arizona." Dalton studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Let's get you safely to your aunt first," he said. "Then we can talk about possibilities." The simple word possibilities sent a flutter of hope through Zara's chest. She busied herself rolling up her bedding to hide the smile that threatened to break across her face. They rode south through the morning, following the river's winding course. The landscape here was different from the Arizona desert, still arid, but with more vegetation along the riverbanks and occasionally small groves of cottonwood and willow trees that provided welcome shade. Around midday, they topped a rise and saw a plume of dust in the distance, moving north along the river. "Riders," Dalton said, pulling his spyglass from his saddlebag. He studied the distant figures for a long moment, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "What is it?" Zara asked anxiously, 6 men, Dalton replied, collapsing the spyglass. Armed, moving fast. He turned to her, his blue eyes serious. One of them looks like Blackwell himself. Fear clutched at Zara's heart. How did they find us? Those Apache scouts must have been working for him, Dalton said grimly. They would have seen us cross the river, reported our direction. He scanned the terrain around them with narrowed eyes. We need to get off this trail, find somewhere to hide until they pass. But the landscape offered little cover, mostly low scrub and scattered mesquite trees. The river was on their left, and to their right, the land rose in a series of rocky, barren ridges. The hills, Dalton decided, pointing to a narrow canyon that cut into the ridge line about a quarter-mile ahead. If we can reach that draw before they spot us, we might be able to lose them in the high ground. They urged their tired horses into a trot, making for the canyon entrance. They were halfway there when a shout echoed across the plain behind them. There, a distant voice called. On the ridge. They've seen us, Dalton said tersely. Ride hard for the canyon. Don't stop for anything. He slapped Zara's mare on the rump, sending the animal into a gallop. Zara clung to the saddle horn, one arm wrapped protectively around her belly as they raced toward the narrow opening in the ridge. Behind them, she could hear the thunder of pursuing hoofbeats, growing louder with each passing second. They reached the canyon entrance with the outlaws less than a quarter-mile behind. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for their horses to navigate single file. Dalton led the way with Zara close behind and the pack mule following reluctantly. Keep going, Dalton urged as the canyon twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the ridge. There's a fork ahead. We'll take the left branch. It's narrower, harder to follow. The left branch proved to be little more than a crevice in the rock, forcing them to dismount and lead the increasingly nervous horses. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as they squeezed through the narrow passage, the shouts of Blackwell's men echoing through the canyon behind them. After what seemed like an eternity, the crevice opened into a small, hidden valley, a natural fortress surrounded on all sides by steep rock walls. A spring bubbled from the base of the northern wall, creating a small pool before disappearing underground. We're trapped, Zara realized, looking at the unscalable cliffs. Not necessarily, Dalton replied, leading the horses to the spring. This is an old Apache hiding place. There's another way out, a trail up the eastern wall that leads to a high plateau. But it's too dangerous to attempt until we know exactly where Blackwell and his men are. He helped Zara dismount, then quickly unsaddled the horses and secured their gear behind a large boulder. From his saddlebags, he removed extra ammunition for his revolver and rifle. If they find this place, we'll need to defend it, he explained, his voice calm despite the gravity of their situation. The entrance is narrow, only 1 or 2 men can come through at a time. That gives us an advantage. Zara stood beside him, feeling helpless. I can shoot, she offered. My brother taught me with his old army revolver. Dalton gave her an appraising look, then nodded and handed her his spare Colt. 6 shots, he said. Make them count if it comes to that. They positioned themselves behind boulders near the entrance to the hidden valley, weapons ready, listening intently for any sign of pursuit. The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2, with only the occasional distant shout to indicate Blackwell's men were still searching the canyon system. As the afternoon wore on, Zara felt the baby stir within her, more active than usual. She shifted uncomfortably, trying to find a position that eased the pressure on her lower back. Dalton noticed her discomfort. You should rest, he said quietly. I'll keep watch. Zara shook her head stubbornly. I'm staying with you. A faint smile touched Dalton's lips. Stubborn woman, he murmured, but there was admiration in his voice. Another hour passed. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon when a pebble clattered down the rock face near the entrance to their hiding place. Dalton tensed, rifle raised, as a shadow appeared in the narrow opening. "Come out, Mrs. Valentine," Samuel Blackwell's voice called, echoing off the stone walls. "We know you're in there. No need for more bloodshed." Zara and Dalton remained silent, exchanging a glance. How many men were with Blackwell? Had they found the only entrance, or were they searching for another way in? "Your guide is a dead man either way," Blackwell continued when they didn't respond. "But you, Mrs. Valentine, you could walk away from this. All I want is your signature on a bill of sale for that mining claim. Sign it, and I give you my word you'll reach California alive." "Your word isn't worth dirt, Blackwell," Dalton called back, his voice hard. "You murdered her brother in cold blood. You think she believes you'll let her live to testify against you?" A harsh laugh echoed through the canyon. "Always the hero, eh, James? I wondered if it was you when my Apache scouts described the guide. Should have known you'd stick your nose where it doesn't belong." Dalton's expression darkened at the confirmation that the Apache scouts had indeed been working for Blackwell. "You're not getting the claim," he shouted. "And you're not taking Mrs. Valentine. Turn around and ride out while you still can." There was a moment of silence, then Blackwell's voice again, harder now. "Have it your way, James, but remember her blood's on your hands when this is over." A rifle cracked, and a bullet ricocheted off the rock wall near Zara's head, sending stone fragments flying. She ducked instinctively, her heart racing. Dalton returned fire, his shots measured and precise. A cry of pain suggested at least one of his bullets had found its mark. "Two at the entrance," Dalton said quietly to Zara. "At least one more further back, providing covering fire. The others must be looking for another way in." "What do we do?" Zara whispered, clutching the revolver with white-knuckled hands. "Hold them here as long as we can," Dalton replied. "Wait for dark, then try for the eastern trail I mentioned." The gunfight continued sporadically through the late afternoon, brief exchanges of fire followed by tense periods of silence. Blackwell's men were being cautious, unwilling to rush the narrow entrance where they would be easy targets. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hidden valley, Dalton touched Zara's arm. "It's time," he said softly. "The eastern trail starts behind that cluster of boulders. We'll go one at a time. You first while I cover you." Zara shook her head vehemently. "I'm not leaving you here alone." "Zara, please." Dalton's voice was urgent. "Think of your child. If we both stay, we both die. At least this way you have a chance." Before she could argue further, a shout came from above them. Looking up, Zara saw silhouettes against the darkening sky. Two of Blackwell's men had found a way onto the cliffs, overlooking their sanctuary. "Behind the boulders," Dalton ordered, pulling Zara with him as rifle fire rained down from above. They crouched in the shelter of the rocks, the situation suddenly far more desperate. With men above and at the entrance, their hidden valley had become a killing ground. "New plan," Dalton said, his voice tight with controlled fear. "We make a run for the eastern trail together. Now, before it's fully dark and they can set up proper positions." Gathering their most essential supplies into a single pack, they prepared to make their desperate escape. The horses would have to be left behind, a fact that clearly pained Dalton, though he didn't hesitate. "Ready?" he asked, checking his rifle one last time. Zara nodded, her throat too dry for speech. She had never been more terrified in her life, yet a strange calm had settled over her. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, she would face it with courage, for her child's sake and for Dalton's. "Stay close to me," Dalton instructed. "When we reach the trail, it's narrow and steep. Don't look down, just keep moving upward. Taking a deep breath, they broke from the cover of the boulders and ran for the eastern wall of the valley. Immediately, shouts and gunfire erupted from both the entrance and the cliffs above. Bullets kicked up dust at their feet and whined off nearby rocks. Dalton returned fire one-handed as they ran, his other hand firmly gripping Zara's arm. They had almost reached the base of the eastern wall when a bullet found its mark, striking Dalton in the side. He stumbled but didn't fall, gritting his teeth against the pain. "Dalton!" Zara cried, seeing the spreading stain on his shirt. "Keep moving," he gasped, pushing her toward a nearly invisible crack in the rock face, the beginning of the trail he had mentioned. The path was indeed narrow and treacherous, little more than footholds cut into the vertical rock face, leading upward into the gathering darkness. Zara climbed as quickly as her pregnant body would allow, painfully aware of Dalton struggling behind her, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. Bullets continued to strike the rock around them, but their elevation and the deepening twilight made them increasingly difficult targets. By the time they reached a narrow ledge halfway up the cliff, the gunfire had become sporadic, more hopeful than accurate. "Rest," Dalton urged, collapsing against the rock wall. His face was alarmingly pale in the fading light. Zara turned her attention to his wound, tearing strips from her petticoat to create a makeshift bandage. The bullet had passed through his side, leaving an ugly but clean wound that bled freely. "How bad?" Dalton asked through clenched teeth as she bound the injury as tightly as she dared. "Bad enough," Zara replied honestly. "But if we can stop the bleeding, you should be able to make it to the top." Dalton nodded, his breathing ragged. "We can't stay here long. Once it's fully dark, they'll regroup and start searching the cliffs more systematically." After a brief rest, they continued their ascent, moving more slowly now as Dalton's strength ebbed. The trail grew even narrower in places, forcing them to press their bodies against the rock face to avoid the sheer drop to their right. Finally, after what seemed like hours of climbing, they reached the top of the cliff. The high plateau stretched before them, bathed in moonlight, a rolling expanse of rock and scrub that extended for miles to the west. "We made it," Zara breathed, helping Dalton over the final ledge. "Not safe yet," Dalton cautioned, grimacing as the movement pulled at his wound. "Need to put distance between us and this spot before we rest again." They stumbled westward across the plateau, following game trails when they could find them. Dalton leaned heavily on Zara, his arm around her shoulders, each step clearly causing him pain. His shirt was soaked with blood despite the bandage, and his skin felt cool and clammy to the touch. After about a mile, Zara felt Dalton's legs begin to buckle. "I need to rest," he admitted, his voice barely audible. They found shelter in the lee of a large boulder, out of the wind that had begun to blow across the exposed plateau. Zara helped Dalton sit, then carefully removed the blood-soaked bandage to examine his wound. In the moonlight, it looked even worse than she had feared. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped, and the edges of the wound were already showing signs of inflammation. "How bad?" Dalton asked again, his eyes fever-bright in the darkness. "You need a doctor," Zara said, unable to lie to him. Dalton gave a weak chuckle that turned into a grimace of pain. "Nearest doctors at Fort Mohave. 2 days' ride at least. Then we'll get you there," Zara said firmly, rebinding the wound with the last clean strips of her petticoat. "Zara," Dalton's hand caught hers, stilling her movements. "Listen to me. Blackwell won't give up. Come morning, he'll have men searching this plateau. You need to keep moving west. Follow the stars, the North Star on your right shoulder, setting moon on your left. You'll reach the old emigrant road by tomorrow night." "I'm not leaving you," Zara said fiercely. Dalton's fingers tightened around hers. Yes, you are, he countered, his blue eyes intense despite his weakened state. Your child deserves a chance at life. I won't be the reason you both die out here. Tears filled Zara's eyes. And what about you? Am I supposed to just leave you here to die alone? A ghost of a smile touched Dalton's pale lips. Who says I'm planning to die? He shifted painfully, reaching for his revolver and checking the chambers. I've got 6 shots and plenty of determination. Blackwell will find I'm not easy prey, even wounded. Zara shook her head, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. No, I won't do it. We stay together. Dalton's expression softened. He reached up, his hand cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness. Stubborn woman, he murmured again, but this time there was something more than admiration in his voice, something that made Zara's heart skip a beat despite their desperate situation. We'll rest until dawn, he decided after a moment. Then we'll decide. Zara settled beside him, sharing her body heat as the night grew colder. Despite his fever, Dalton was shivering, his breathing shallow and rapid. She knew without being told that he was growing weaker with each passing hour. As the night deepened around them, Zara found herself praying for the first time since her brother's death. Not formal prayers like the ones her mother had taught her, but desperate pleas from the heart. Please don't let him die. Please don't make me face this alone. Somewhere in those dark hours, as Dalton's breathing grew more labored, Zara realized a truth she had been avoiding. She had fallen in love with this quiet, courageous man. A man who had risked everything for her, without asking anything in return. A man who was now prepared to sacrifice his life so that she and her child might live. The realization brought not joy but a deeper anguish. How cruel that she should find love again, only to lose it in the vast emptiness of this plateau. Dawn came with a faint lightening of the eastern sky. Dalton stirred beside her, his eyes opening slowly, clouded with pain and fever. Morning, he whispered. How do you feel? Zara asked, already knowing the answer from the heat radiating from his skin. Been better, he admitted with a weak attempt at humor. Been worse too. Zara helped him drink from their nearly empty canteen, then checked his wound again. The inflammation had worsened during the night, angry red streaks extending outward from the bullet hole. We need to move, Dalton said, struggling to sit up. Blackwell's men will be searching by now. You can't walk, Zara protested. Have to try, he insisted. Just help me up. With Zara's support, Dalton managed to get to his feet, swaying dangerously before steadying himself against the boulder. His face was gray with pain and exhaustion, but determination burned in his eyes. West, he said, gesturing toward the distant horizon. Keep the morning sun behind us. They moved at a painfully slow pace across the plateau, Dalton leaning heavily on Zara with each step. By mid-morning, his strength was failing rapidly, his skin burning with fever, his breathing increasingly labored. Need to rest, he gasped, collapsing to his knees despite Zara's attempts to support him. They had found a small depression in the plateau, not quite a canyon, but a shallow dip in the land that offered some protection from both the sun and searching eyes. A stunted juniper tree provided meager shade, and beneath it, Dalton finally surrendered to the weakness that had been threatening to overcome him for hours. Zara, he whispered as she cradled his head in her lap. You need to go on without me. No, she said firmly, tears blurring her vision. We stay together, I told you that. Dalton's fever-bright eyes searched her face. Why? He asked softly. Why risk your life, your child's life, for a man you barely know? Zara hesitated, then decided that if these were to be their last hours together, she would speak the truth. Because I love you, she said simply. I don't understand how or why it happened so quickly, but I do, and I won't leave you to die alone. A look of wonder crossed Dalton's pale face. Zara, he breathed, reaching up to touch her cheek. "I've loved you since the moment you stood in that canyon, facing down Blackwell's gang with nothing but courage and determination." His confession, spoken with such quiet certainty, broke something inside Zara. She bent and kissed him gently, tasting the salt of tears, whether his or hers, she couldn't tell. When she pulled back, Dalton was smiling despite his pain. "That's worth staying alive for," he murmured. The sound of voices in the distance shattered their brief moment of connection. Dalton stiffened, his hand moving instinctively to his revolver. "They're getting closer," he said, his voice suddenly stronger with renewed resolve. "Help me up. We need to find better cover." But before Zara could assist him, another sound reached their ears, the distant but distinct pounding of many hoofbeats, approaching from the west. "Riders," Dalton whispered, his eyes narrowing as he struggled to see across the plateau. "Too many for Blackwell's gang." The hoofbeats grew louder, and soon Zara could make out a dust cloud on the western horizon. As it drew nearer, she saw that it was indeed a large group of mounted men, at least 20, moving at a steady trot directly toward their position. "Army patrol," Dalton breathed, relief evident in his voice. "From Fort Mojave, must be responding to reports of Blackwell crossing into California territory." Zara felt a surge of hope so powerful it left her light-headed. "They'll help us." Dalton nodded, his eyes never leaving the approaching riders. "The commander at Fort Mojave is Captain Wilson. Good man. I guided for him last year during the Apache troubles." The voices that had been approaching from the east, Blackwell's men, had fallen silent. They too had spotted the cavalry patrol and were presumably retreating to avoid confrontation. When the patrol was within a quarter-mile, Dalton raised his arm and fired his revolver into the air 3 times, a universal signal of distress in the Western Territories. The response was immediate. The column of riders changed direction slightly, heading directly for their position at an increased pace. Within minutes, the lead riders had reached them, blue uniformed cavalrymen with dust-covered faces and alert eyes. "Need help here." The sergeant at the head of the column called back to his companions. Dismounting quickly, he approached Dalton and Zara, taking in their condition with a practiced eye. "Sergeant Miller, Company D, Fort Mojave," he introduced himself. "What happened here?" "Dalton James," Dalton replied weakly. "This is Mrs. Zara Valentine. We're being pursued by Samuel Blackwell and his gang. I've been shot." Recognition flashed across the sergeant's weather-beaten face. "James, the scout who guided for Captain Wilson last year," Dalton nodded. "Get the captain," Miller ordered one of his men, "and fetch the medical kit." Within moments, more soldiers had dismounted and formed a protective perimeter around Zara and Dalton. A tall officer with a graying mustache pushed through the group, concern evident in his intelligent eyes. "James," he said, kneeling beside Dalton. "What in blazes are you doing out here?" "Long story, Captain." Dalton managed a weak smile. "Involves a lady in distress, a mining claim, and some very persistent outlaws." Captain Wilson's gaze shifted to Zara, taking in her pregnant condition and exhausted state. "Madam," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. Then, turning back to Dalton, "Blackwell's gang crossed into California territory 2 days ago. We've been tracking them since receiving reports from settlers near the river. Didn't expect to find you in the middle of it." "Never could stay out of trouble, sir," Dalton replied, his attempt at humor undermined by the grimace of pain that followed. A soldier approached with a medical kit, and the captain stepped back to allow him access to Dalton's wound. The man, a young corporal with a serious expression, examined the injury with professional efficiency. "Bullet wound through and through," he reported to the captain. "Infections setting in. He needs a proper doctor as soon as possible. Captain Wilson nodded grimly. We'll get him back to the fort. Johnson, prepare a stretcher. Parker, give Mrs. Valentine your canteen and some rations. He turned back to Zara. Can you ride, madam? Yes, Zara assured him, though in truth she wasn't certain her exhausted body was capable of much more exertion. As if reading her thoughts, the captain added, We'll pair you with one of the steadier men. It's about 15 miles to the fort, should reach it by nightfall if we push. Within a remarkably short time, the soldiers had constructed a makeshift stretcher for Dalton and arranged their column for the return journey. Zara found herself mounted behind a kindly older trooper named Pearson, who assured her he had 5 daughters of his own and would see her safely to the fort. As they set out westward, Zara kept her eyes fixed on Dalton's stretcher, carried carefully between 2 horses. The corporal with medical training rode alongside, monitoring his condition. Despite her exhaustion, Zara refused to close her eyes, terrified that if she looked away, Dalton might slip away from her forever. The journey to Fort Mohave passed in a blur of dust, hoofbeats, and growing anxiety as Dalton's condition visibly worsened. By the time the adobe walls of the fort appeared on the horizon, he had fallen into a feverish delirium, sometimes calling out Zara's name, other times murmuring about the canyon and Apache trails. The fort's doctor was waiting for them at the gate, alerted by a rider sent ahead. Dalton was whisked away to the infirmary while Zara found herself guided to the commander's quarters, where Captain Wilson's wife, Eleanor, took charge of her with gentle efficiency. You poor dear, the older woman clucked, helping Zara into a chair. You look ready to collapse. Let me fetch you some tea and something to eat, then you can bathe and rest. Dalton, Zara began, her voice cracking with exhaustion and worry. I need to know Dr. Hammond is the finest physician in the territory, Eleanor assured her. Your friend is in good hands. As soon as there's news, I promise you'll be the first to know. Too exhausted to argue, Zara surrendered to Eleanor's motherly care. She ate the simple meal provided, bathed in a real tub with hot water and soap, and donned a clean nightgown borrowed from Eleanor's own wardrobe. Despite her determination to stay awake until she heard news of Dalton, she fell into a deep sleep almost the moment her head touched the pillow in the small guest room. She awoke to pale morning light filtering through lace curtains and the sound of birds outside her window. For a disorienting moment, Zara couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the past days came rushing back and she sat up with a gasp. Dalton! Eleanor Wilson entered the room as if summoned by Zara's cry. Good morning, my dear, she said with a warm smile. You've slept nearly 14 hours. Dalton, Zara repeated urgently. Is he alive? Eleanor assured her quickly. And the doctor says his chances are good, though he's not out of danger yet. The infection is severe, but Dr. Hammond has seen worse cases recover fully. Relief washed over Zara, leaving her light-headed. Can I see him? After breakfast, Eleanor said firmly. You need to keep up your strength, especially in your condition. The mention of her pregnancy brought Zara's hands instinctively to her belly. The baby moved beneath her touch, a reassuring flutter that reminded her she wasn't fighting just for herself or for Dalton, but for their future. A future she was suddenly, fiercely determined would include all 3 of them. After a substantial breakfast and a change into a borrowed day dress, let out at the seams to accommodate her pregnancy, Zara was finally escorted to the fort's infirmary. The small, whitewashed building contained just 4 beds, only one of which was occupied. Dalton lay still and pale against the white sheets, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. A bandage encircled his bare torso, and a damp cloth had been placed on his forehead to combat the fever that still flushed his cheeks. Dr. Hammond, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression, met Zara at the door. "Mrs. Valentine," he greeted her. "Captain Wilson has told me something of your ordeal. It's a miracle either of you survived." "How is he?" Zara asked, her eyes never leaving Dalton's face. "Fighting," the doctor replied honestly. "The wound itself isn't fatal, but the infection is severe. I've cleaned it thoroughly and applied carbolic acid, but now it's a waiting game. The next 24 hours will tell." Zara moved to Dalton's bedside, taking his hand in hers. His skin was hot and dry, his fingers limp in her grasp. "Can he hear me?" she asked softly. "Perhaps," Dr. Hammond said. "Many believe the unconscious can still sense the presence of loved ones." He paused, then added gently, "I'll leave you with him. Call if there's any change." Alone with Dalton, Zara pulled a chair close to his bed and sat, still holding his hand. "I'm here," she whispered. "You saved me, saved us," she corrected, touching her rounded belly with her free hand. "Now you need to fight. Fight to come back to us, Dalton. We need you." Throughout the day, Zara remained at Dalton's side, speaking softly to him, bathing his face with cool water when his fever spiked, and praying as she had never prayed before. Alina brought food that went largely untouched and offered words of comfort that Zara barely heard. As night fell, Dr. Hammond returned to check Dalton's condition. His expression was grave as he examined the wound and took Dalton's pulse. "No improvement," he admitted when Zara questioned him, "but no deterioration either. That's something, at least. Should I stay with him tonight?" Zara asked, though she already knew her answer regardless of the doctor's response. Dr. Hammond nodded. "I think that would be good. I'll be in my quarters next door if you need me." He hesitated, then added kindly, "Try to rest yourself, Mrs. Valentine. Your child needs you strong." The night passed slowly. Zara dozed occasionally in her chair, only to jerk awake at the slightest sound from Dalton. Near dawn, his fever seemed to break, his skin cooling noticeably beneath her touch. His breathing deepened, becoming more regular. As the first light of morning filtered through the infirmary windows, Dalton's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he stared at the ceiling, confusion evident in his expression. Then his gaze shifted and found Zara. "Am I dreaming?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "No," Zara replied, tears of joy filling her eyes. "You're at Fort Mojave. The cavalry patrol found us." Dalton's cracked lips curved in a faint smile. "We made it then." "We made it," Zara confirmed, squeezing his hand. "Blackwell. Captain Wilson sent men to find him after we were rescued. They're still searching, but the captain believes Blackwell has fled back across the river into Arizona territory." Dalton nodded weakly, then winced as the movement caused him pain. "Water." Zara helped him drink small sips from a cup on the bedside table, supporting his head with her hand. When he had finished, he caught her wrist, his fingers surprisingly strong despite his weakened state. "Did you mean what you said?" he asked, his blue eyes searching hers. "Out on the plateau when I thought I was dying. Did you mean it?" Zara's heart swelled with emotion. "Every word," she said softly. "I love you, Dalton James. I don't know how it happened so quickly, but I do." Dalton's smile widened despite his obvious pain. "Good," he whispered, "because I meant it too." His eyelids drooped, exhaustion overtaking him again. "Stay with me," he murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "Always," Zara promised, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. Dr. Hammond, entering the infirmary to check on his patient, found them thus Dalton sleeping peacefully, his hand clasped in Zara's, her head resting on the edge of the bed beside him. The doctor smiled to himself, recognizing the healing power of love when he saw it. Over the next week, Dalton's condition improved steadily. The infection receded, his appetite returned, and soon he was strong enough to sit up in bed and eventually to take short walks around the infirmary with Zara's support. During this time of recovery, Zara rarely left his side. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, and their growing feelings for each other. Captain Wilson, seeing the bond forming between them, arranged for Zara to stay in guest quarters at the fort rather than continuing on to California immediately. 2 weeks after their dramatic rescue, Dalton and Zara sat together on a bench outside the infirmary, watching the evening flag ceremony. Dalton's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "Captain Wilson received a telegram from the territorial governor today," Dalton said, breaking a comfortable silence between them. "Samuel Blackwell was captured trying to cross back into Arizona. He's being held for trial in Yuma, charged with murder, attempted murder, and a dozen other crimes." Zara felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a fear she had been carrying since the moment she witnessed her brother's murder. "He'll hang," she said quietly. "It wasn't a question." Dalton nodded. "Wilson says they want you to testify, but not until after the baby is born. They're holding depositions from witnesses in the meantime." "Will you go with me?" Zara asked, turning to look up at him. "When the time comes, try to stop me," Dalton replied with a small smile. His expression grew more serious as he took her hand in his. "Zara, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened at the intensity in his blue eyes. "Yes, these past weeks getting to know you, falling in love with you, they've been the most meaningful of my life." Dalton's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "I know it's fast, and I know your life has already had more than its share of complications, but I can't imagine my future without you in it." He shifted on the bench, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his healing wound, and faced her fully. "Zara Valentine, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up within Zara, pure and overwhelming. "Yes," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Oh, Dalton, yes." Their kiss was gentle, but filled with promise, a commitment to the future they would build together. A future neither had imagined possible when they first met in that dangerous canyon. Captain Wilson himself performed the simple ceremony 3 days later in the fort's small chapel. Eleanor stood as Zara's witness, while Sergeant Miller served as Dalton's best man. The bride wore a borrowed dress of pale blue, hastily altered to accommodate her advancing pregnancy, and carried a small bouquet of desert wildflowers gathered by the captain's children. As they spoke their vows, Zara felt her child move within her, a flutter of movement that seemed to affirm their new beginning as a family. Dalton's hands were steady as he placed a simple gold band, purchased from a departing soldier for an exorbitant sum, on her finger, his blue eyes shining with love and certainty. The journey to Winnetka, California, began a week later, when Dalton was deemed strong enough to travel. Captain Wilson provided them with an Army escort to the nearest stage station, where they boarded a westbound coach with the captain's blessing, and a letter of introduction to the sheriff in Winnetka, explaining the circumstances of their arrival. The stage journey was long and uncomfortable, particularly for Zara in her 7th month of pregnancy. But the discomfort seemed trivial compared to what they had already endured together. Dalton was attentive throughout, ensuring she had the most comfortable seat, stopping frequently to allow her to stretch her legs, and distracting her with stories and plans for their future. "I've been thinking," he said as their stage rattled through the mountains of Southern California. "Your aunt's boarding house in Winnetka, do you think she might need a handyman? Someone to do repairs, look after the place?" Zara smiled, touched by his willingness to adapt his life to hers. "I'm sure she would," she replied. "But is that really what you want to do?" After being a scout, a guide living free in the wilderness, Dalton considered her question seriously, his eyes on the passing landscape. "I've lived that life for a long time," he said finally. "It has its appeal, but I've realized something these past weeks." His gaze returned to her face, warm with affection. "Home isn't a place, it's people. It's you and our child." He placed his hand gently on her rounded belly. "That's freedom of a different kind, one I've never had before." Zara leaned her head against his shoulder, overwhelmed by the simple truth of his words. "We'll find our place," she promised. "Together." Aunt Louise Valentine was waiting at the Winnetka station when their stage finally arrived, having received Zara's telegram sent from Fort Mohave. She was a tall, spare woman with Zara's dark hair, liberally streaked with gray, and eyes that missed nothing. Her initial surprise at finding her niece both pregnant and newly married gave way quickly to genuine welcome. "So you're the man who saved my niece," she said to Dalton, sizing him up with a frank gaze. "And now your family. Well, Mr. James, I hope you're handy with tools. My boarding house has a leaky roof and a temperamental stove that could use a man's attention." Dalton grinned, instantly liking this forthright woman. "I believe I can manage that, Mrs. Valentine. Louise," she corrected. "We're family now, as I said." Her expression softened as she turned to Zara. "Your brother would be proud of you, dear. You've shown the Valentine spirit, always finding a way forward, no matter the obstacles." With those words of welcome, Louise ushered them into her carriage for the short drive to Valentine boarding house, a 3-story Victorian structure painted a cheerful yellow, with white gingerbread trim and a wide, inviting porch. It stood on a corner lot, surrounded by mature oak trees and a well-tended garden. "It's beautiful," Zara breathed, taking in what would be their new home. "It needs work," Louise said matter-of-factly, "but it's home. I've prepared the garden cottage for you two, thought you'd appreciate the privacy. It's small, but it has its own kitchen and enough room for a nursery." The garden cottage proved to be a charming structure at the back of the property, originally the carriage house, Louise explained, but converted to living quarters some years earlier. True to her word, it was small but perfectly formed, with a cozy sitting room, compact kitchen, bedroom, and an additional small room that would serve admirably as a nursery. "It's perfect," Dalton said, and Zara could tell from his expression that he meant it. After years of sleeping under the stars or in crude shelters, this snug cottage must seem like a palace. Life in Winnetka quickly settled into a pleasant routine. Dalton proved as adept at household repairs as he had been at wilderness survival, fixing the boarding house's leaky roof, temperamental stove, and a host of other problems within weeks of their arrival. Louise, impressed by his capabilities, soon promoted him from handyman to co-manager, involving him in the business aspects of running the boarding house. Zara, meanwhile, found her own niche, taking over the accounting, which Louise had always detested, and gradually introducing improvements to the comfort and appearance of the guest rooms. As her pregnancy advanced, she spent more time sitting on the wide front porch, greeting guests, and becoming a favorite with the regular boarders for her warm hospitality and excellent listening skills. The baby arrived on a warm August evening, 2 months after their arrival in Winnetka. Dalton paced the cottage floor while the town's doctor and Louise attended Zara through a labor that lasted well into the night. When the doctor finally emerged from the bedroom with a tired smile, Dalton felt his knees weaken with relief. "You have a son, Mr. James," the physician announced. "A healthy boy with a fine set of lungs, and your wife came through splendidly." Dalton entered the bedroom with near reverence to find Zara propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her eyes shining with joy and pride. "Meet your son," she said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal a tiny face with a shock of dark hair. "I thought we might name him William after my brother. William Dalton James." Dalton sat carefully on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife and son. "William," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "It's perfect." He reached out with trembling fingers to touch the baby's cheek. "Hello, William, I'm your father." The infant opened his eyes at the sound of Dalton's voice, revealing eyes of newborn blue that would later darken to match his father's. His tiny hand escaped the blanket and wrapped instinctively around Dalton's finger, gripping with surprising strength. "He knows you," Zara whispered, watching the connection form between father and son. In that moment, looking at his wife and newborn child, Dalton felt a completeness he had never known was possible. All the years of wandering, the pain of loss, the dangers faced and overcome, all of it had led him to this perfect moment. "Thank you," he said to Zara, his voice choked with emotion. She understood without explanation. "Thank you," she replied simply, "for finding me in that canyon." As autumn turned to winter and winter gave way to spring, the James family became a beloved fixture in Winnetka. Dalton's skills and reliability earned him respect throughout the community, while Zara's warmth and intelligence made her a sought-after friend and confidante. The following summer, Zara traveled with Dalton back to Yuma, where she testified at Samuel Blackwell's trial. With her testimony and that of several other witnesses, the verdict was never in doubt. Blackwell was sentenced to hang for the murder of William Valentine and numerous other crimes. After the trial, before returning to California, they made a detour to Silver Creek. The mining claim that had cost William his life still belonged to Zara, and she wanted to see it one last time before selling it to a reputable mining company that had made a fair offer. Standing on the hillside where her brother had staked his claim, with Dalton beside her and young William in her arms, Zara felt a sense of closure. "He would have liked to know his nephew," she said softly, remembering her brother's excitement about her pregnancy. "He would have been proud of the mother his nephew has," Dalton replied, his arm around her shoulders. "And the life you've built." The years that followed brought more children: a daughter, Louise, born in 1885, and another son, Thomas, who arrived in 1887. The garden cottage was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Dalton eventually purchased the boarding house outright when Aunt Louise decided to retire to a smaller home nearby. Valentine House, as they renamed it, became known throughout Southern California as one of the finest places to stay clean, comfortable, and managed with genuine hospitality by the James family. Dalton's reputation as a former scout and guide occasionally brought him offers to lead expeditions or hunting parties, but he invariably declined, having found contentment in his life as husband, father, and businessman. Zara never forgot those harrowing days in the canyon and on the plateau, when death had seemed so certain and escape so impossible. But rather than dwelling on the danger, she cherished the memory of how she and Dalton had found each other against all odds, brought together by circumstances that might have broken lesser spirits. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton presented Zara with a small wooden box he had crafted himself. Inside was a polished stone from Serpent Canyon, the very place where they had first met. "To remind us," he said as she turned the smooth stone in her hand, "that sometimes the most dangerous paths lead to the greatest treasures." Zara smiled, thinking of their 3 beautiful children sleeping upstairs, of the life they had built together, of the love that had grown from those desperate days of flight and fear. "I wouldn't change a step of the journey," she said, reaching up to touch his face still weathered from years in the sun, but softer now with the contentment of home and family. "Not a single step." Their kiss was as sweet and full of promise as it had been that day at Fort Mohave, when they had pledged their lives to each other. In the safety of their home, with the desert and its dangers far behind them, they held each other close, two people who had faced death together, and found, instead, a love that would last a lifetime.